Good afternoon. My name is Klein. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Economics, University of Kent, and today I will talk about the Great Depression, story worth telling again. In 2008, when the financial crisis spread across economies, both economists and policymakers turned to economic historians and asked, could we prevent another Great Depression? Economic historians provided answers, and yes, a Great Depression number 2 was avoided. Indeed, when we look at the numbers, comparing the main economic indicators between Great Depression and Great Recession, the story is confirmed. For example, on average, gross domestic product fell by about 30% during the Great Depression, by only about 3% during the Great Recession. Unemployment reached staggering 30% heights in 1930s, however, only about 8% during 2009 and 2010. Here, I do not want to trivialize human hardship that many people endured during the financial crisis. Indeed, there were huge regional discrepancies. However, things could have been much worse. So it seems like economists learned a lesson from the Great Depression. However, I think there are more lessons that we can learn, and that it is worth telling the story of Great Depression again. Research on the Great Depression is really a lively debate. You have various theoretical and empirical approaches. As for the theoretical approaches, you have a standard Keynesian analysis on one spectrum. On the other spectrum, you have a dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. As for the empirical approaches, you can do the analysis with the simple averages, or you can employ rather sophisticated econometrics techniques. Regional focus also changed. In the early decades of the research on the Great Depression, it was all United States focused, and for a good reason. In the past 3 decades, Great Depression started to be viewed as the international global crisis. There were several myths which were dispelled. For example, that the Wall Street crash caused the Great Depression, or that the New Deal was the major Keynesian-time fiscal stimulus, or that the United Kingdom experienced the Great Depression. In the past 2 decades, a consensus began to emerge, though not unchallenged, and I will talk about that consensus today. To understand the causes of the Great Depression, which is a rather complex story, I will focus on just a few determinants, although some would say those were the main causes. Let's go back to the 1920s. There are 2 things that we need to understand. First, 1920s experienced a huge deflation, decline in the prices. Deflation per se is not bad from the point of view of consumer. Indeed, consumers experienced increase in the real income. However, a long-lasting, persistent deflation can have a rather negative effect on the firm's decisions, on firm's profitability, and the overall performance of economies. Second very important fact is US dominant position on the international monetary market. US was the main lender, the main creditor to both developing as well as developed countries. So if anything happened in the US economy, it is very likely going to have an effect on the other economies as well. In 1928, Federal Reserves increased interest rates in order to curtail speculative lending on the Wall Street. This sent a huge shock to both domestic and international economies. There are many effects that an increase in the interest rate can have on economies. Here I'm going to focus only on 2 of them. First, increase in the interest rate in the United States is going to curtail foreign investments of the US in both developed and in developing countries. And many, especially developing countries, found themselves in a rather dire situation, not having enough of capital to finance their international trade. Second effect of the increase of interest rate in the United States was that it forced many economies to follow the restrictive monetary policy. Now, how come that an economic policy in one country can have such a profound effect on economic policies in other countries? The answer is simple. It's the gold standard. Gold standard as a system of fixed exchange rates in which a country commits itself to keep the exchange rate stable. So if one country increases in interest rate, this will put a lot of pressure on the stability of exchange rates in other countries. What are the possible solutions? There are several of them. First, countries could cooperate. Unfortunately, this did not happen during the 1920s and 1930s. Second, they can fight it. They can use reserves from the central banks. Third, they can leave the gold standard. Or fourth, they can follow the restrictive monetary policy. Many countries decided to follow restrictive monetary policies because they truly believed that preserving gold standard is a good for the benefit, for the welfare of their countries. Early stages of the Great Depression was very, very different for developed countries and developing and primary goods producing countries. Developing countries really were in dire straits from the very beginning. It was because restrictive monetary policies and a lack of financial resources usually flowing from the United States put their economy into dire straits. They were not able to repaying their debts to the developed countries, and many of them decided to leave the gold standard. Basically, by the end of the 1920s and early 1930s, we observed the overall decrease in economic activities across the globe. Developed economies were capable of weathering the storm all the way until early 1930s. However, by 1931, even developed economies were succumbing to the pressures of the Great Depression. Why? First of all, they followed restrictive monetary policies originated in the United States. And second, a lot of developing countries were unable to pay their debts. So this put a lot of pressure into the financial system of developing countries, and those countries found themselves in a huge financial distress by the spring of 1931. In that spring and the summer of 1931, financial and banking crises in Austria, Hungary, and Germany caused a lot of shocks going through the European economies. Great Britain, unfortunately, suffered mostly, and in the autumn of 1931, Great Britain was forced to leave the gold standard. Britain leaving gold standard was a major shock to the international monetary system in the early 1930s. Indeed, many countries followed the British example, and by 1932, only 6 main economies remained on the gold standard, down from 47 in 1931. So was leaving the gold standard a curse or was it a blessing? It turned out that it was a blessing. Leaving on gold standard meant that economies could free their economic policies. They could regain the control over their interest rates. They could change deflationary expectations to inflationary expectations. They can enhance their competitiveness on the international markets, and they can lower real wages. So today we know that early stages of Great Depression, abandonment of gold standard was a key to the success. What about the later stages? What about the role of fiscal policies? This is a very active area of research nowadays. It was believed for many decades that especially New Deal was a major type of Keynesian fiscal stimulus which helped US economy to get out of the Great Depression. Recent research showed otherwise. We can say that there was really very little fiscal stimulus going on in the 1930s on the both sides of Atlantic. As for the United Kingdom, maybe an exception can be rearmament in the late 1930s. But overall, we can say that fiscal policies, not that they failed, they were really not tried. Now, we know quite a lot about the causes of the Great Depression, and we learned several very important lessons. We avoided the second Great Depression in 2008. However, there are more lessons that can be learned, especially about the recovery. Recovery can be fragile, as an example of the United States in 1937 showed. So what we can learn from the Great Depression is that recovery is not automatic, and we can learn much more about the role of fiscal policies to facilitating better recovery. Thank you.